Hello everyone, this is I-24 News. First, our headlines. The IDF is expanding its operations in the Rafah area. Israel is under growing international pressure, and no breakthrough yet in the negotiations to free the hostages. The IDF is expanding its operations in the Rafah area. I-24 News' Robert Swift has the latest.
Israel is pressing ahead, moving deeper into Rafah. Its tanks are now operating inside the city's center. As has been seen elsewhere in Gaza, Hamas are unable to halt the weight of the Israeli army's advance, but are capable of exacting a price in blood through asymmetric attacks using snipers, RPGs, and mortars. On Wednesday morning, the IDF announced the deaths of 3 soldiers killed in fighting inside Rafah. And Hamas continues to launch rockets into Israeli territory. Jerusalem is under much greater international scrutiny operating in Rafah than it was in previous Gaza maneuvers. The US continues to provide diplomatic and logistical support, despite having previously warned against entering Rafah.
Everything we're seeing, and we can't see everything, but everything that we can see tells us that they are not moving in a major ground operation in population centers in the center of Rafah.
But the killing of an Egyptian soldier in an exchange of fire with Israelis and 2 mass civilian casualty events this week show the sensitivity of the Rafah battlefield, a diplomatic consideration that could have strategic implications for the fighting on the ground.
Surely the question that needs to be asked is, how many more mistakes is the world going to tolerate?
With me here in the studio are Yaakov Laping, a military affairs analyst, and Dani Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the US. Thank you for coming, both of you. Yaakov, let's start with you. Is the IDF inside Rafah, really, or not?
It absolutely is inside Rafah, and it's very interesting to see how the IDF has approached this operation. Instead of sending, the whole division, the 162nd, into Rafah at once, it's subdivided Rafah, and it is going subdivision area by area, and it's doing this very methodically, stirring up the area, gathering intelligence on what comes out. We saw in that video report, Hamas trying to hold off this attack without any success, but that enables the IDF to gather intelligence. It's taking its time. It is not rushing this operation, and that's the kind of approach that we're seeing, and it is slowly but surely absolutely tightening its grip, while also taking apart a growing number of cross-border tunnels that were linking Sinai to Rafah. These were strategic oxygen supplies for Hamas in terms of smuggling goods, smuggling weapons, cash. Everything that Hamas needs to survive, that is now being cut off. So this is a very important moment in the war.
And still, Dani Ayalon, the United States is not impressed, to say the least.
Not impressed, but its action actually shows great support for Israel, and we see it in the international arena. Now I think the next move would be in the United Nations Security Council. And they're already behind door closed consultations, which is a preamble to maybe a formal gathering of the convening of the council, and then if there is a call for a vote, now the big question will be, will the US veto a vote calling on Israel to stop outright the operation in Rafah? I believe it will do it, but it will not be without a price.
The incident a couple days ago where about 20, 30 people died in Rafah. What is the main investigation result of the IDF?
So the main suspicion that the investigation is zooming in on, as well as the General Staff Special Fact-Finding Mechanism, which is a parallel investigation, they're both zooming in on the suspicion that Hamas was storing arms in that area. There was a rocket launcher about 45 meters away from the targeted compound, and there were probably rockets and other munitions in the area. They shared information about an intercepted phone call between 2 Gazans. All of the indications are that Hamas stored weapons. Those weapons blew up as a result of that very, very targeted strike using munitions that are the smallest munitions that the Israeli Air Force can load onto fighter jets, with just 17 kilograms of explosives. This is a very small explosive, and the IDF is saying there's no way that a fire this big could have been set off by that. There's a secondary explosion. Something happened in the middle, and it's very likely going to be Hamas weapons that were stored in the area.
And so far, the United States seems to accept that.
Yes, and we were just, Jacob showed John Kirby, the strategic advisor for the Council, the Security Council of the United States, said that everything that they see is that Israel pretty much abides by what it promised the United States, that is to move very methodically, very carefully, with very, very much in mind not to hurt civilians.
Right. Let's go live to southern Israel, where I-24 correspondent Zach Anders is right now with the latest from there. Zach?
Yeah, we've been following a couple of storylines. Of course, the IDF announcing 3 additional fatalities, these coming out of the Rafah area, bringing the toll, the I-24 count, to 286 who have fallen inside Gaza. And just a quick note, I know that many of the other outlets have different numbers about this number that have been killed inside Gaza, some choosing to count additional fatalities like those that were killed on the Israeli side by rocket launches from Kerem Shalom into the Kerem Shalom area, but on Israeli soil. Some of these counts are variable, but our count 286. By my count, since May 6th, that moment, the night when ground forces went in, secured the Rafah crossing, then on the morning of May 7th. From that point to today, there's been, by my count, 23 fatalities, IDF troops who have been killed inside Gaza in the fighting, the twin campaigns that have been taking place in the Rafah area and in the Jabalia area, which you'll see over my shoulder. We've seen sporadic airstrikes throughout the afternoon, not as intense as what we were seeing last week when they were just constant. And from what we can tell, what we can confirm for ground movement in this area, in the Jabalia area, it does appear that the fighting has continued, but we've been seeing some differing things. So we're waiting for confirmation on a couple of key points later tonight as to ground force movement in this area. You'll remember that the evacuation zone in the Jabalia area now runs all the way to the coastline. Switching over to Rafah, this is where the humanitarian focus has taken front page of so many papers around the world. The Rafah crossing remains closed through the Egyptian side. That's significant at this point now because it's been several weeks where there is no possibility, none whatsoever, for anyone to transit out into Egypt. I've been speaking to several sources inside Gaza, some who have family, who have been able to pay thousands of dollars to be able to transit through the crossing through into Egypt. That is no more. So there really is nowhere to go at this point. And also on that point, it has appeared that in the Mawasi area, because it has absorbed almost 1 million people now that have fled from Rafah and followed the evacuation orders, that some acute needs are starting to develop. In particular, water has been a comment I've heard frequently over the past 24 hours, that before the Rafah incursion, the water situation was more stable and these water collection points were easier to get to. Since the Rafah operation, it has sounded like it's been a very challenging task. I've talked to one person inside Gaza who said now since the Rafah incursion, they've had to wake up at 5 a.m. to go to one of the water collection points, and that it's taken hours. The queue is hundreds of people long. This is mostly managed by the United Nations, he says. That's going to be amplified by this pier that has now detached. Yesterday confirmed that the U.S.-built pier in the rough seas came undone. It's not really clear how the specifics behind that, but the Pentagon says it could take up to a week, at least a week, to repair this pier and be able to accept some of the vessels that were situated off the pier and bringing some of that aid, the pallets, in. So that's another major storyline we're watching as well. Also of note that a U.S. soldier was injured in this process. It's not entirely clear the specifics, but the Pentagon wanted to stress that soldier was not on the beach, not on the soil of Gaza, but still on that pier, and that it's been towed now to the Israeli side near the port of Ashkelon.
All right, Zach Anders in southern Israel, thank you very much for that. So meanwhile, Israel is under growing international pressure, both from the Western world and moderate Arab countries. I-24 News' Bianca Zanini has more.
The sound of sirens in Rafah is constant. Despite repeated international calls and warnings to stop its military operation in Rafah, Israel pushes on. The world is watching and condemning, from the slogan "All Eyes on Rafah," which has gone viral in recent days, to growing criticism from allies. And Israel is increasingly isolated on the global stage.
We want this to stop, right? Whether and that applies to today, yesterday, the day before. We have been very consistent in our call for a ceasefire, for the release of the hostages, for greater humanitarian access.
The UN condemned Sunday's attack in Rafah, where almost 50 Palestinians were killed in a massive fire. Israel called it a tragic mistake, but for an increasing number of world leaders, their patience is running out.
Algeria will circulate this afternoon a draft resolution on Rafah. It will be a short text, a decisive text to stop the killing in Rafah.
Spain welcomed top Palestinian officials after joining Ireland and Norway in recognizing Palestine as a state.
This recognition strengthens our resolve to continue our struggle for a just and lasting peace. Rafah is testing the world. Does not fail Rafah. Does not fail Rafah. Does not fail Palestine.
Slovenia is set to join the group on Thursday. Early Wednesday, the already tense relationship between Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Brazil's President Lula took a step for the worse when Brasilia recalled its ambassador and said it will not be appointing a replacement for now. The operation in Rafah, which Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists is necessary to dismantle Hamas and to bring back the remaining hostages held by the terror group, is also endangering Israel's relationship with its most important ally and supporter, the U.S.
We still don't believe that a major ground operation in Rafah is warranted. We still don't want to see the Israelis, as we say, smash into Rafah with large units over large pieces of territory. We still believe that, and we haven't seen that at this point. But we're going to be watching this, of course, very, very closely.
In the region, Israel's hopes to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia took a hit when the Saudi foreign minister accused Israel of committing continuous genocidal massacres of Palestinian refugees in Rafah, something Israel denies. As smoke rose over Rafah, Israeli tanks advanced in the strip.
More about the diplomatic pressure in a moment, but Yaakov, as we speak, the IDF announces that it gained control over the border between Egypt and Gaza, total control.
This is a critical development. It's one of the core goals of this war, is to cut off Hamas from external smuggling sources. That's the Philadelphia corridor and Sinai. So this is a very important development. There are still tunnels to take over and demolish, so the work isn't done here, but this is a very important moment. This was definitely, from the start, one of the main strategic goals of this war is to take control of that corridor. They left it to the end of the high-intensity stage of this war, but this is a very important achievement for the IDF going forward.
And the diplomatic pressure, Danny, how long will Israel be able to stand?
Well, there's always a race, and Israel has always, in wars past, including the Lebanon war in 2006, understanding that we have a limited time, they pushed, like in the last 24 hours, they pushed all the way in order to get a fait accompli that when the UN resolution is coming about, then Israel will have the best lines to hold. So if indeed now Israel holds the entire Philadelphia road, this shows that Israel understands that time is very, very limited. And I guess there are many discussions, very intensive discussions with the United States. Israel needs only to focus on the United States. We cannot convince anyone else, not Brazil and not Colombia and not Ireland and not all of that. And I would think that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in order to try and fight a losing fight by trying a TikTok wars with Spain or Ireland or Norway or anyone else, would be positive. And the message should be to the world, are you all those that condemn us, are you going to kill the terrorists for us? Are you going to destroy the Hamas tunnels for us? Are you going to bring the refugees for us? Tell us, what are you going to do? If you cannot do anything, just step aside and let us do what we need to do. It's a fight, a justified war of self-defense.
Okay, here's one that is definitely convinced. U.S. Senator Republican Lindsey Graham is back in Israel today. He talked about the ICC.
I promise you that we will do all we can, Mr. Prime Minister, to hold the ICC account for this outrage against the people of Israel. A slap in the face to your judiciary. To International Court of Justice, you're a joke. The head judge of the ICJ is a raving anti-Semite.
Yeah, and this is, Danny, a major concern of Israeli Prime Minister, the ICC.
Yes, it's a major concern on a personal issue, and it shouldn't be, actually. The ICC, Israel is not a party to the ICC, and even if there is a ruling by the ICC accepting the prosecutor's demand for arrest warrants against the Gallant foreign Minister of Defense and Netanyahu, it would be on a country-by-country, case-by-case. And if we have the United States on our side, I think that is not going to be very effective.
And Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan bin Abdullah, he spoke today on Israel's operation in Gaza. Let's take a listen.
We are here to say thank you. We're here to say thank you to Spain for giving hope in a very dark time. We are here to say thank you to Spain and to Norway and to Ireland and to Slovenia for taking the right decision at the right time, for being on the right side of history, for being on the right side of justice. With all the dark we are seeing as a result of the continuing humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, this is the right moment to give a beacon of hope to the two-state solution, to peace, to coexistence. And for that, we thank you. And we hope that others will follow suit, because the only way forward is the path to peace, and the path to peace goes through a two-state solution, through a state of Palestine that lives in peace and harmony with all its neighbors, including Israel. We need an immediate ceasefire. We need immediate humanitarian access to Gaza. We need hope. And this step that you have taken, Your Excellency, my friend, gives us hope. So thank you.
And the decision the foreign minister was talking about was, of course, recognizing a Palestinian state by these four countries. For more context on this, we have Abdallah Al-Junaid from Bahrain. Good evening, and good to see you again, Abdallah.
Pleasure is mine, Jacob.
I'm worried. Are we nearing the point of no return when it comes to normalization and greater peace in this neighborhood?
Well, I'll be very frank. I mean, I was very saddened with what Danny have said just earlier. And I would like to draw his attention to what Eisenkot just said this early evening. He said, this war will never achieve a total annihilation of Hamas. This is a catastrophe. If he won't, I will share the article with him. What we need to do is one thing. If we're going to address every disagreement with Israel with regard to the way it's prosecuting this war, we're going to be anti-Israeli or anti-Semitic. This is not the path that's going to save this region. The more Israel digs itself into this conflict, it's going to be very hard for the rest of the region to really, deal with Israel with the same anticipation that we had when the Abrahamic Accord was signed in 2020.
Let me bring in Ambassador Ayalon back.
Well, first of all, I agree with Abdallah that it's not going to be an easy battle, and I don't think that Israel should fight until the last Hamas terrorist is killed or captured. And I do believe that we need to think about the day after. I think that the main threat to Hamas is actually the Palestinian Authority, a revitalized Palestinian Authority. Once Israel announces what would be the civilian regime the day after, then the population will stop backing Hamas. The way that we see now in Gaza is that the population, not knowing what will be the day after, have no other choice but to stick with Hamas. And in order to actually to divorce them from Hamas, we need to bring a different regime over, maybe an intermediate military, consists of Arab countries, maybe even European countries, I don't know. But what I want to answer to Abdallah is that it is too bad that the table has turned diplomatically and politically, and so easy was forgotten the massacre of the 7th of October. And as days go by, the degradation of the Hamas capabilities is also very important for the day after. So I don't think that Israel has much choice but to reach a point, and I guess the government understands that at some point the US will say, okay, that's it. And what the strategy now is to get the best positions and the maximum damage to Hamas before that happens.
Abdallah?
Again, I could, sympathize with what Danny says, but where things are heading, by the end of this conflict, you're not going to have anybody willing to step in and help. That train have already departed the station. With your decision, with Israel's decision, or Benjamin Netanyahu's decision to enter Rafah in the way he did, and the starting of the operation by what the whole world have seen 2 nights ago is not something that the world or the Israelis will forget very soon. What we need to do is one thing. Can we agree on one thing? If you want a real partnership in addressing the challenges of the Gaza the day after, I can assure you it's not on Benjamin Netanyahu agenda. And this is his war, it's not Israel war. And by the end of things, I think Israel going to lose so much, and it's not going to achieve the destruction of Hamas.
Let me turn to you, Yaakov Lapin, here in the studio. The Israeli chief of the Council for National Security said today that the intense war, will at least go for 7 months. Eisenkot, who was quoted here before, said there's no instant victory. What are we looking at? Years?
So I don't think the high-intensity phase of this war is going to last for another 7 months. I don't think that there will be a need for 7 months of 3 divisions operating, full throttle in the Gaza Strip. I think that after the Rafah stage of this operation is over, Philadelphia secured, the cross-border tunnels are destroyed, the northern Gaza part is under control. That's when I think Israel is going to start actually going down a gear and entering what they call stage 3, and that is targeted operations. You don't need entire divisions. You start transitioning to brigades, going in, going out, and after that, even battalions, and it will start to resemble the security situation in the West Bank.
So let me go back to you, Abdallah. What is the timetable? How much time do we have, if we have, to turn things around?
I think it's up to Israel to decide on that. And I can assure you, it's not going to be Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, I appreciate what Yaakov says, but at the end of the day, we can only save the living. If we're going to just talk or address this issue while we are sitting here in our rooms or studios, I can assure him that there are Palestinian and Israeli soldiers that are dying on a daily basis. If we want to change realities, we need to address it with true, fundamentals. And the first of all is stop what's going on.
Let me refer you back to the timetable, because we have elections in the United States. and we have the stage of where we are, and we have political.
Let us not get dig ourselves into timelines or timetables that is related to American election or what's the shape of the next Israeli government going to be. I'm telling you, Israelis and Palestinians are dying momentarily. Now, what we should do about that?
You're saying immediately, right now, if I'm getting you right. Yeah. Abdallah Al-Junaid, I thank you very much. Hope to see you again soon. Danny, we have about a minute left.
Okay, so just, I appreciate Abdallah. I think he's a true friend, and he really is concerned about the region, and he really supports very much the Abraham Accords and the normalization with Saudi Arabia. And I believe also, although maybe he cannot say it outright, but the demise of Hamas and the terrorist elements is also a threat to all the moderate regimes in the area. One last thing is about, of course, people are dying now. We have to remember, Hamas puts in front of them the civilians, so it's their responsibility. And also, there's one other thing, it is our hostages. I believe that if we can get some modicum of arrangement with the hostages coming out, all of them, then it will be worthwhile to have a ceasefire.
Okay, we have to take a short break. We'll be right back to you with more special coverage here on I-24 News. Stay tuned.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en I-24 News.
Welcome back. The Islamic Jihad, a partner organization of Hamas in Gaza, has released a video of a hostage. His name is Sasha Turfanov. That happened yesterday. I-24 News' Erica Jackson has the reaction in Israel.
In a nearly 30-second-long clip, Israeli hostage Alexander Sasha Turfanov identifies himself and says that in the coming days he will speak about what happened to him and other hostages in Gaza.
שמי אלכסנדר טרופנוב, אזרחי ישראל והמפגינים. בימים הקרובים אתם תשמעו ממני את כל האמת של מה שקרה לי ולשאר האסירים פה בעזה. תבקש מכם, תהיו סבלניים.
The Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group aims to manipulate the heartbroken family waiting for Sasha to return.
Seeing my Sasha on television today is very heartening, but it also breaks my heart that he has been in captivity for such a long time. I appeal to everyone, to all decision makers, please do everything, absolutely everything, to bring my son and all the hostages home now.
The video was not dated, and no further information indicated when it could have been filmed. Turfanov was kidnapped on October 7th from kibbutz Nir Oz, along with his mother, girlfriend, and grandmother, Irena Tati. His family and girlfriend were released in a hostage deal in late November.
Sashenka, my light, I was so happy to see you on TV and hear your voice. I hope that I will see you soon here, that you arrive alive and well.
My dear Sasha, we are waiting for you to come back to us, and we are making every possible effort to ensure it happens soon.
His father, Vitaly Turfanov, was murdered in the Hamas onslaught. The 4 Turfanov family members immigrated from Russia 25 years ago and have no other relatives in Israel. Yelena Turfanov was one of 3 women who appeared in a Hamas propaganda clip that was released on October 30th. 50-year-old Yelena and her mother, 73-year-old Irena Tati, were released by Hamas on November 29th at the request of Russian President Vladimir Putin. The move came during a week-long negotiated lull in the fighting that included the release of 105 hostages in exchange for 240 Palestinian security prisoners Israel had jailed, as well as an increase in humanitarian aid to Gaza. 2 weeks ago, Hamas aired a video of 51-year-old British Israeli Nadav Popplewell, who is also being held hostage in Gaza. There was no indication as to when the video was filmed. 125 Israeli hostages remain in Gaza. Not all of them are alive. Islamic Jihad and Hamas have both previously issued similar videos of hostages the terror groups are holding in what Israel says is deplorable psychological warfare.
Let's go to I-24 News' Balir Slodin in Tel Aviv tonight. Balir, with some more details about the negotiations to free the hostages.
Yes, exactly. We know that Israel has delivered a proposal for the Egyptians and the Qataris, the mediators, in order to deliver it to Hamas. But Hamas has said, unofficially at least yesterday, to Saudi media that they will not participate in any talks unless Israel stops its operation in Rafah. Now, we know from an Egyptian source today telling I-24 News that Israel, in one of the draft proposals that it gave the Egyptians, it has been agreed, or Israel has agreed, to a sustainable end of the fighting. Now, this is not end of the war, and this is coming after Hamas's demands to end the war as a major obstacle to reaching an agreement for a hostage deal, since actually the end of the last hostage deal in November last year. So Israel is agreeing in these words to a sustainable end of the fighting. This will come, of course, in stages, the hostage deal itself. So in the first stage, we might see freeing of the civilians, the elderly, the children, and the second stage might we see also the release of some bodies. But one group in particular will be or they will stay in Hamas's hands, according to this proposal, which is the male Israeli soldiers, because the Israelis know that it's very difficult to release those. We remember that 10 years ago, for one male Israeli soldier, Israel agreed to the release of more than 1,000, including Yahya Sinwar, the current Hamas leader in Gaza.
Right. Balir Sladin, thank you very much for this report. Let's talk about the Egyptian angle with journalist Ihab Abbas. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Egypt was extremely worried about the Rafah developments, but now it's relatively quiet. Can you explain that?
You're talking that Egyptians are quiet or the situation in Rafah is quiet?
I'm talking about the Egyptians.
Yeah, okay. I think right now Egypt is considering our options dealing with what's going on regarding the negotiations and the escalation in Rafah. And I think that there are multiple talks between the Egyptians and the Americans and the Israelis as well, because I think this is a main key relationship between Egypt and the Israelis to keep the negotiations going on, despite what's going on the ground, whether Egypt agreed or not. But it's crucial that Egyptians keep this kind of like negotiations as a mediation between Hamas and Israeli government and forces. So I think it's not calming down right now. Maybe it's a moment of having deep thinking until they can develop a new approach to get things on the track again.
Right. Is it fair to say that as long as there are no Palestinians crossing the border to Egypt, then the Egyptians are quite okay with what's happening?
No, it's not that way. Egyptians' main goal is to end this war and to secure the Egypt's land security, make sure that nothing wrong with anybody could cross the borders to Egypt. Egyptians, they don't want this to happen, because if this happens, it means that the Palestinian, the whole thing about Palestinian lands and rights will be dissolved, and will be no one could resolve this issue from the Palestinians themselves, because they will leave their lands, and this won't happen as the Egyptians thinking and most of the Palestinians thinking. So it will be hard to see Egyptians right now just caring about their lands and security only. I don't think Egyptians they think this way. No, they don't.
Do you think the Egyptians are interested in running Gaza, at least partially, the day after Hamas?
Not at all.
No?
No, not at all. Not at all. They would like to see Palestinians running Gaza and the Palestinian territories, and they'd like to see the two-state solution. But no, but they might agree with maybe some international management to Gaza in some certain point. They might, I'm not sure, but they might, in the way to solve this issue forever, or once for all. But to get involved in administrating Gaza Strip, no, they don't want to do this.
All right, Ihab Abbas, thank you very much for that.
Sure. Thanks.
So the big question is, Danny, who's going to do it then?
Well, there will have to be some interim period. In the long run, I guess Israel also understands that it will have to be Palestinians governing Palestinians. The main concern of Israel is that Hamas will not be a part of any future regime, and if the Palestinian authorities will at some point take over, that it will be a real revitalized one. That means that they will really be committed to fight terror, to arrest terrorists, and also to change the attitude and the entire political culture. You know, the whole exercise, Jacob, of the disengagement when Arik Sharon left Gaza totally in 2005 was actually to give the Palestinians a chance to show how they can rise up to the challenge. They have their own territory now, and they should take control and run things as they, again, preamble maybe to a Palestinian state. Of course, what happened, Hamas took over, and the rest is history. So at this point, I think that there are two issues. One, of course, is the Philadelphia. Once Israel has secured the entire corridor, now it has to secure that once Israel leaves, then there will be what instated there would be a way to stop any kind of smuggling. That would have to be with cooperation with Egypt. I think at the end of the day, Egypt also has the same interest. By the way, the Egyptians should be very embarrassed to see, they were the ones that were in charge of the corridor of Philadelphia. And the fact that all the smuggling took place is really a breach of trust. And quite frankly, we know that the Egyptians did not put the best quality forces right there to
So let me ask you, Yaakov, now that the IDF, as we've mentioned, just announced that they have gained control of the corridor or the border between Egypt and Gaza, will Israel leave this in the hands of the Egyptians back? And if so, under what conditions?
There's no way that Israel can leave this to anybody. I'm talking about the Gazan side. The Egyptian side is up to the Egyptians, but the Gazan side has to, in my opinion, remain under Israeli control. Otherwise, what has this operation been for? And going into this operation, the IDF estimated that there are 50 cross-border tunnels. That's a lot. As of yesterday, they were talking about taking control of over 10, so there's still dozens left of underground tunnels. This is all vital. We're talking about the day after. We're talking about defeating Hamas. Without control, sustained control, persistent control of this border, there will be no defeat of Hamas. So this is an achievement that has to be preserved.
The weapons, the rockets, the tunnels, the materials for tunnels, everything came through these.
A lot came through these. Look, the Egyptians, after Morsi was thrown out of power by Sisi, there was a destruction of many of these tunnels, but around 50 were left. Why? We don't know. It's either incompetence. It can only be one of two things. One is Egyptian incompetence. The other is there was some kind of financial incentive to keep these going for trade, for smuggling purposes. It's one or the other. It can't be anything else. And at the end of the day, the ability of Hamas to stay in touch with the outside world ran through those tunnels, as well as there was also smuggling overground as well. So Israel has to maintain control of this corridor going forward. It was a huge mistake all those years ago when it left. It cannot repeat that mistake and expect different results. And of course, Hamas also had a huge Gazan domestic arms industry. They were taught by the Iranians how to produce their own weapons, and that's where most of these weapons that we're dealing with now actually originate from in terms of rockets, mortars. Most of those are produced by Hamas in Gaza. But without the smuggling, they wouldn't have the power that they do. So it's vital that Israel preserves that achievement.
Okay, let's go to Lebanon. Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister Mikati announced on Tuesday that the country has reached out to Iraq, Egypt, and Jordan to facilitate the return of Syrian refugees to their country. And we're going to talk about this with David Daoud from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you very much for joining us. Tell me,
for having me.
What do you think about this program, and what are the chances of this plan?
Look, Lebanon has been trying to rid itself of the Syrian refugee population that it's had for some time. There have been several schemes that have been devised either in cooperation with the Syrian government bilaterally that saw some limited results, some limited repatriation of Syrians already over the past few years. These Syrians do pose, do present a financial burden on Lebanon's increasingly meager resources. Will this work? It has more chances to work in theory because it is multilateral and is premised on the idea of creating more safe zones in Syria for the Syrian refugees to return home. But it's hard to say now. It's at this stage, it seems like one of several schemes that Lebanon has tried to engage in to, again, rid itself of the Syrian refugee population problem.
What is expected for them in Syria if they go back?
So this is a question, and this is why Lebanon seems to be emphasizing the creation of safe zones. Now, is that going to be, a perfunctory, a symbolic thing rather than a creation of actual safe zones? That's the real question. This also abdicates Lebanon's responsibility for itself in some ways, creating this Syrian refugee problem, given that Hezbollah, a Lebanese group, participated in the Syrian civil war on behalf of Bashar, or on the side of Bashar al-Assad, to save his regime, and caused the displacement, among many other allied forces, of these millions of Syrian refugees, not just into Lebanon, but into Turkey and other places. And Lebanon, in some ways, is refusing to take responsibility for Hezbollah's actions, as it does in every other case. So, the safe zones, it could just be something that Lebanon is paying lip service to simply get these people out. Does it really care if they're actually safe? I don't think so.
And what about the accountability of the Assad regime? What about that?
That is an interesting question. Unfortunately, rather than accountability for the Assad regime for its crimes against its people, what we've seen is an increasing trend within the Arab world towards normalization of the Assad regime, the reintegration of the Assad regime into the Arab League, the welcoming of President Bashar al-Assad on visits to Saudi Arabia, having Gulf officials, particularly from the Emirates, prior to that visit Syria and meet with Bashar al-Assad. Right, there's been this reintegration and this desire by the Arab world to kind of let bygones be bygones, almost, hoping that reintegrating Assad will help counter growing Iranian influence in Iran. Could this lead to growing international normalization? Could this be a first step towards growing international normalization? It's possible, but it does not seem like accountability, unfortunately, is in Assad's future.
Right. David Daoud, thank you very much for that. Now let's go to Bastien Bory in Dubai to talk about Qatar's plans for displaced people in northern Syria. Hi, Bastien. What's the plan there?
Well, Jacob, we're talking about more than 1,100 new homes in northern Syria funded by Qatar in 142-story buildings. This is the largest village open to date in northern Syria, with a clinic, a school, a mosque, shops, etc., to supposedly welcome a tiny fraction of Syrians who had to leave Aleppo because of the civil war. So on paper, it may sound like a good thing or a good idea, but in reality, no one really knows who will be welcomed in this village. Are we talking about displaced, unarmed Syrian civilians, or extremist militants from local factions supported by Qatar and Turkey? Probably both.
So what does it tell you about the relationships between Qatar and Assad?
I mean, initially, Qatar had basically always seen Syria as the culmination of its foreign policy in a way, and one of the very few ways to enable itself to act as a regional power after being a diplomatic nobody. So before the war in Syria, Bashar al-Assad and his wife were regular visitors to Doha. Qatari institutions were big investors in Syria. Sheikh Hamad was instrumental in restoring Syrian relations with European countries. Qatar basically wanted to moderate Assad's policies, but when the war started in 2011, Qatar started betting on the Syrian opposition to strengthen Doha's role in the region, to maintain good relations with the Americans and the Europeans who were also backing these dissidents, and to circumvent as well Damascus's refusal to extend Qatari gas pipelines to Europe via Syria. So Qatar has spent billions on armaments, financial support for dissidents, diplomatic maneuvering, lobbying in favor of the opposition, and today on protecting and uniting, as we see with these villages, the extremist factions of northern Syria to obstruct a solution to the Syrian crisis and prevent Damascus from regaining sovereignty in this region.
All right, Bastien, thank you very much. in Dubai. 28 years old Amit Bouskila was murdered on October 7th in the Nova Music Festival. Her body was recovered from a tunnel in Gaza just recently. Her family didn't know if she was alive or dead for almost 8 months. Here's their reaction.
2 weeks have passed since the body of Amit Bouskila was recovered from Gaza and brought back to Israel. Weeks in which the family has been digesting the hardest news of all.
They took my princess, my baby, in the prime of her life. A 28-year-old girl.
On October 7th, Amit was at the Nova party with her friend. Shimon, she called you in her final moments. What did she say to you?
A terrorist ran after her and screamed in Arabic. She was shouting, "No, no, no." She was a righteous person. Her last words were a prayer. And then I heard 3 gunshots.
Soon after the call was cut off, the family was shown the footage of Amit in a car inside the Gaza Strip.
Amit was declared missing. After 3 weeks, she was declared a hostage. And after 4 weeks, a living hostage. After 3 months, they told us we made a mistake and we don't know what's happening with Amit.
After months of uncertainty, a knock on the door. The soldiers informed the family that Amit had been murdered and her body was recovered from Gaza.
There was a soldier who had a dream a few days before. Amit came to him in the dream and said, "I will give you the signs to find me. I will show you where I am, so that you come and rescue me, to bring the light back to my mother." They found a door that was entirely covered with sandbags. I thank God for bringing her back to me.
Thousands of Israelis attended the funeral, and unusually, the Prime Minister called to offer condolences.
I think they should all stand up and leave their seats and go home. The Knesset should be closed.
Amit was the whole world to Ilana and Shimon. Now, they try to hold on to her memory and always remember the faith and joy of life she had.
And now, a surprising group of people is showing support for Israel these days. I-24 News' Nicole Tzedek has this unusual story.
A large display of solidarity seen in the streets of Ashkelon in southern Israel. But take a closer look, and you may be surprised by who's actually waving these blue and white flags.
Basically, my whole family was involved in the Second World War. They were Nazis. They were known as a Nazi family in town.
Hundreds of Germans with their own family history of anti-Semitism.
It's very important for me to be here to say my family story because I'm a descendant of Nazi perpetrators. My family was actively involved in the Holocaust. My grandparents, also my grandmothers. And as I found out, I was very shocked, and I want to speak about because my grandparents, they didn't speak about that.
They're all in the Jewish state participating in March of the Nations, a solidarity mission that brings together Holocaust survivors with descendants of the Nazi regime.
I can't change the past, but it's my responsibility to affect the future and the present times.
And their mission is working.
Not only they are not blamed in what their grandfathers done, but also they take responsibility for those deeds. So I don't see anything more high, more pure, and more human than those people.
Aryeh Itamar was born in the Soviet Union, a survivor of the Nazi regime.
My grandmother managed to escape with me from the Odessa, which was surrounded by the Nazi armies. And it was the last train which managed to break through the German and the Romanian forces.
He came to Israel in 1947 when he was just 9 years old, making the long journey on the SS Exodus. But despite this painful past, he has no hate here in the present.
I cannot look on young people that they have to carry the blame of their grandfathers. I do not accept this idea at all.
In the shadow of the October 7th massacre and the anti-Semitic rallies that have since popped up throughout Europe, the mission of March of the Nations and March of Life are even more crucial this year.
March of Life this year, we were in front of the university in Leipzig, and there were a Palestine demonstration inside, but we have a bigger group and it was a very good statement and a very important statement, and we will not be silent in this time.
For me, it was pretty clear that I cannot stay silent. I can't remain silent, especially in a situation like today after the 7th of October. So important to speak up and to stand with Israel and to stand with the Jewish people and to support them.
Hundreds of Germans with no Jewish ties showing support for the Jewish state in its time of need.
This is it for us. Stay tuned for more news with Kalev Ben David here on I-24 News. Have a good night from Tel Aviv.
On October 7th, the shocking attack of Hamas resulted in the devastation of more than 20 communities in southern Israel, the murder of 1,400 innocent people, and more than 253 hostages. KKL-JNF immediately assisted in the evacuation efforts of the survivors, purchased new ambulances, and sponsored psychological support for traumatized children and adults. KKL-JNF Switzerland is determined to rebuild these destroyed communities of the Yitzhak Kingdom again so that the families can return home. Join us now.
to ensure the security not just of the Palestinian people.
Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben David. It is day 236 of Israel's war against Hamas, a conflict that won't be ending anytime soon, with Israel's National Security Advisor, Tzachi Hanegbi, saying today that the war is expected to continue another 7 months into early next year. And the cost of that fight grows daily. The IDF announcing 3 more combat deaths. Staff Sergeants Amir Galilov, Uri Bar-Or, and Ido Appel, all killed by an explosion inside a booby-trapped building in Rafah, bringing the total number of combat deaths in Gaza to 290. The IDF says it now has operational control, though, of the Gaza-Egypt border. Robert Swift has more on the battle for Rafah.
Israel is pressing ahead, moving deeper into Rafah. Its tanks are now operating inside the city's center. As has been seen elsewhere in Gaza, Hamas are unable to halt the weight of the Israeli army's advance, but are capable of exacting a price in blood through asymmetric attacks using snipers, RPGs, and mortars. On Wednesday morning, the IDF announced the deaths of 3 soldiers killed in fighting inside Rafah. And Hamas continues to launch rockets into Israeli territory. Jerusalem is under much greater international scrutiny operating in Rafah than it was in previous Gaza maneuvers. The US continues to provide diplomatic and logistical support, despite having previously warned against entering Rafah.
Everything we're seeing, and we can't see everything, but everything that we can see, tells us that they are not moving in a major ground operation in population centers in the center of Rafah.
But the killing of an Egyptian soldier in an exchange of fire with Israelis and 2 mass civilian casualty events this week show the sensitivity of the Rafah battlefield, a diplomatic consideration that could have strategic implications for the fighting on the ground.
Surely the question that needs to be asked is, how many more mistakes is the world going to tolerate?
Well, for more, let's go to our correspondent, Zach Anders. He's down by the Israel-Gaza border in southern Israel. And Zach, we heard John Kirby say no major ground operation, but there is some very serious fighting going on in Rafah, even as we speak, and some progress by Israeli troops along that key Philadelphia corridor.
Yeah, and John Kirby saying that we know of. If he was watching some of the footage that's coming out of Palestinian media reports showing some of the engagement, you would hear the gunfire, you would see empty streets in Rafah and IDF tanks that are now confirmed through multiple outlets, including ours, inside the heart of Rafah, in an area that has been evacuated. The evacuation call, of course, coming in at the beginning of this month. Some now 1 million people have left the Rafah area. It's unclear where exactly those people have gone, although we've seen large growth in the area, the Mawasi humanitarian zone. We've seen people back in Khan Yunis as well. So it does appear, by all accounts, as we're now getting within the last hour confirmation from the IDF, that they have secured secured the Philadelphia corridor. This should come with a caveat, of course, that while they say operational control over the Philadelphia corridor, now tonight that does not mean that we're going to see images of IDF tanks or ground forces all along that corridor. Of course, this is about 7 miles worth of territory. What has been remarkable is to see also additional updates coming out about additional tunnels that have been found. We're still working to confirm some of these details. The IDF has not specified exactly in great detail what they're finding, but it is believed that at this point tonight that additional tunnels running from Rafah, the Rafah area, into Egypt have been discovered, ones that potentially were previously known to intelligence but are now being scoped out by ground forces. Again, this is something we're working to confirm and get more details about, but certainly something that was believed to be true for a long time. You can go back to 2014, you can go back to 2006, old New York Times articles about these tunnels as well. So this has been a long-standing belief, but now it does appear that this is a severing of this lifeline to Hamas that is taking place as we speak. And the ground forces are not just in Rafah, they're in Jabalia as well, where we see continued fighting. And if you take the moment that the IDF moved into Rafah and secured the Rafah crossing about the night of May 6th, the morning of May 7th, from that moment, and these two twin arenas opened up, Rafah and Jabalia, as the IDF forces moved into Jabalia again around that same time, the majority of the casualties and fatalities on the IDF side that we've seen have come in the Jabalia arena, where there has been fierce fighting there as well. But we should note that the 3 fatalities that were listed today come from the Rafah area, the IDF announces, now bringing the total to 286 that have died inside Gaza, 291 if you count the additional soldiers who were killed by rocket fire targeting Kerem Shalom. They were on the Israeli side. So, again, the count of those who have died inside Gaza, 286. And by my count, by my notes, the number that have died since those twin arenas opened up, again, the night of May 6th, 23 of those fatalities of the 286 have come since May 6th, that moment when the IDF moved into Rafah and once again into Jabalia.
All right, Zach Gann is there on the Israel-Gaza border. Thank you for that. And with me in studio, we have Reserves IDF Major General Eitan Dangot, the former military secretary to 3 defense ministers and former head of Kogat. We have Asaf Sharif, the former Israeli Consul General in New York and a former senior advisor to the late Prime Minister Ariel Sharon's chief of staff, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran. Eitan, I want to start with you. Obviously, clearly, the IDF making progress there in Rafah, still trying to secure or clear up Jabalia. But 7 months, how does that strike you as an estimate of on the military side?
I cannot explain the way Tzachi Hanegbi is calculated another 7 months, until now 7 months. What I may say that if you are looking now for the military activity in Rafah, that in my opinion was too late, or we missed a little bit the option to cut the military activity after the first time of the release of the hostages, to arrange kind of a long ceasefire or stopping the war, and then get back the hostages. But if you look now about the military efforts, and the efforts in Rafah in the military way is to break the Rafah brigade and the structure, to achieve control on the border between Gaza to Egypt, what you just informed that already IDF announced that it has been achieved on what we call Philadelphia. The meaning is the underground tunnels under control. You cut the oxygen supply to Hamas inside Gaza. By the way, near this border were deployed dozens of rockets already on launching it towards Israel. It means Hamas aware about the sensitivity of this area between Israel and Egypt, and how Israel has to maneuver in such a way. I may tell you this is one of the most complicated combat that we had in Gaza since we entered there, because you have to take care about, you are just nearby the Egyptian soldier, as we know what happened in Rafah crossing. Secondly, you have 100,000 of refugees that are everywhere, and Hamas trying to create such kind of killing them in order to create delegitimation to Israel. The third is Hamas had time to prepare the area, and the most important and difficult is what we are doing in the underground. This is the main achievement. So we are now very close towards the, I think, the last one-third of this military activity by taking all Rafah area. And now will come the main question, Caleb. The main question, what is next? If we are not going to achieve such kind of release of the hostages, it will be a big question mark where we are going.
Well, that moves us also in the political and diplomatic sphere, Asaf. And fitting the number, whether it's how many months it is, but clearly the government is trying to lay the groundwork for the Israeli public for a long campaign there in Gaza. But of course, that has consequences for the people, not just living in that area, living in the north as well. Those people have evacuated their homes. And we know within the government itself, and reports tonight of differences, not even reports, some open statements of differences even in the war cabinet about that, about how is it conducted. I mean, is this government built for a campaign that's going to last well into next year? Is the country built for that politically, socially?
Well, first of all, the current government will not last 7 months. Some elements of the government will leave probably next week. You mentioned not only Tzachi Hanegbi, but Minister Gadi Eisenkot has stated today that it's going to take much longer than 7 months to eliminate Hamas as a threat. There's another thing that happens in 7 months. It will be the beginning of the second tenure of either President Biden or President Trump. In January, in 7 months' time, they will go into office. I don't believe that the American election will, either of the candidate wants this war to last to the American election. I don't think Israel's foreign relationship can last another 7 months of what we're seeing now. It's a devastating month to the Israeli PR, and I don't believe it will last so long.
All right, well, since you mentioned it, let's take a closer look at the diplomatic front. All eyes on Rafah. We're hearing it. It's a new slogan that's now been shared millions of times on social media, just as the latest example of the growing global criticism against Israel's military operation there in Rafah. And this is not just in the public sphere, but also on the diplomatic stage. Israel is growing increasingly isolated. Senior correspondent Bianca Zanini has the latest on that front.
The sound of sirens in Rafah is constant. Despite repeated international calls and warnings to stop its military operation in Rafah, Israel pushes on. The world is watching and condemning, from the slogan, "All eyes on Rafah," which has gone viral in recent days, to growing criticism from allies. And Israel is increasingly isolated on the global stage.
We want this to stop, right? Whether and that applies to today, yesterday, the day before. We have been very consistent in our call for a ceasefire, for the release of the hostages, for greater humanitarian access.
The UN condemned Sunday's attack in Rafah, where almost 50 Palestinians were killed in a massive fire. Israel called it a tragic mistake, but for an increasing number of world leaders, their patience is running out.
Algeria will circulate this afternoon a draft resolution on Rafah. It will be a short text, a decisive text to stop the killing in Rafah.
Spain welcomed top Palestinian officials after joining Ireland and Norway in recognizing Palestine as a state.
This recognition strengthens our resolve to continue our struggle for a just and lasting peace. Rafah is testing the world. Does not fail Rafah. Does not fail Rafah. Does not fail Palestine.
Slovenia is set to join the group on Thursday. Early Wednesday, the already tense relationship between Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Brazil's President Lula took a step for the worse when Brasilia recalled its ambassador and said it will not be appointing a replacement for now. The operation in Rafah, which Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists is necessary to dismantle Hamas and to bring back the remaining hostages held by the terror group, is also endangering Israel's relationship with its most important ally and supporter, the U.S.
We still don't believe that a major ground operation in Rafah is warranted. We still don't want to see the Israelis, as we say, smash into Rafah with large units over large pieces of territory. We still believe that, and we haven't seen that at this point. But we're going to be watching this, of course, very, very closely.
In the region, Israel's hopes to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia took a hit when the Saudi foreign minister accused Israel of committing continuous genocidal massacres of Palestinian refugees in Rafah, something Israel denies. As smoke rose over Rafah, Israeli tanks advanced in the Strip.
Ariel, all eyes on Rafah, but a visit there just this very evening indicates that Israel is determined to go ahead with its operations there, even if it's going to sustain this international criticism.
All eyes on Rafah, and IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi saw with his own eyes the situation on the ground, visiting the southernmost city in the Gaza Strip, holding a situation assessment meeting. In the meeting, he said that he is very pleased to see the pace of advancement and the different military achievements on the ground, saying to the soldiers there, completely dismantling Hamas is a national mission of the State of Israel, trying to explain the importance of dismantling the last 4 battalions of Hamas. But indeed, as the question you raised earlier, how does this play into the assessment of 7 months going forward? I think we have to look at different phases of the fighting. We're looking at perhaps 4 to 6 weeks left in Rafah, and then the situation in Gaza is going to become more like the West Bank in Area A, how the IDF carries out its operations there. This is not something that I'm making up myself. This is what Israeli military and political leaders have said themselves, that they expect once the first phase of the operation in Gaza, which has not yet been complete, that's the official dismantling of Hamas battalions all across the Strip, that is not the end of the job. The IDF will still need to conduct operations, raids, nearly on a nightly basis, as we are seeing in the West Bank, to completely uproot Hamas in Gaza.
All right, Asif, we heard John Kirby sort of give it mixed results, but Secretary of State Anthony Blinken in Moldova this evening lobbing criticism against Israel. Israel's not going to shed tears about Brazil recalling its ambassador, who hasn't been here, by the way, since February anyway, or some of these other countries, but the U.S., that's the key. If the U.S. is going to sustain its support for Israel, at least, as you say, until the election.
It's hard to imagine how we started this operation in October 7th and the support we got and what we see now. It's a huge challenge for Israel, huge, and especially on Rafah, which is the most successful casualty-wise. This is the most successful operation we had, because if you compare it to the Palestinian casualties in other places, well, Rafah is, you don't see a lot of civilians get killed. We succeeded, and the Americans didn't believe it, but we succeeded in evacuating the civilian population almost completely. And what you see, the numbers is the lowest since we saw in October 7th.
And yet causing some of the biggest uproar.
It doesn't help us PR-wise or with the government. One thing about the Philadelphia corridor, and 18 years ago, during the disengagement plan, I was the government spokesperson. Right. And there was a lot of controversy surrounding this issue. Should we leave this corridor or not? Right. And we decided to leave.
As part of the
at the disengagement, Prime Minister disengagement. Today, after 18 years that we achieved full control of this corridor, I can assure you that this will be the last place that Israel will leave ever in Gaza. This will stay in Israel's responsibility for a long time.
Right, key to keeping those arms from being smuggled into...
The number I heard today is 82 tunnels. I know they announced 20, but I think it's closer to 100.
Wow, okay.
I think that about the tunnels, first of all, IDF is not giving the numbers.
Right.
Secondly, I think concerning what Asaf just said, 1 million people were evacuated from Rafah during the last 3 weeks. It's something that was done carefully, but in a very professional way by the IDF.
Right.
Secondly, what I would like to say, we are now in the center part of Rafah. Right. In my opinion, taking this place is something you should complete more or less the main mission. So Israel, if it's not going to make any kind of agreement of releasing the hostages, it's moving to another mechanism. The question is whether Israel war cabinet has prepared what is its policy for the day after without releasing the hostage people.
Well, since you're raising the hostages, Eitan, of course, there are negotiations continuing towards some kind of new hostage deal, and reports of divisions, which we mentioned within the government's war cabinet, over just how much flexibility Israel can show when it comes to a ceasefire in terms of the length, conditions, and even the wording of a possible truce that would go together with the release of hostages. For more, let's go to our correspondent, Balir Sladin, who is at Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. And Balir, what do we know about these negotiations or talks towards a possible hostage deal?
Yes, just to mention before that the families of the hostages and some other activists are right now closing or blocking the Ayalon North street here in Tel Aviv, which is a very main highway here in Tel Aviv, which means that the pressure is continuing from the families of the hostages and their supporters also today, of course. Now, an Egyptian source is telling us today, after reports of Israel delivering the new proposal to the Egyptians and the Qataris, he is saying that Israel, agreed to a sustainable end of fighting, not end of the war. The wording here, as you mentioned, is very important. So we're talking about some sort of a sustainable ceasefire, sustainable end of fighting, but it's not clear whether Israel agrees to a complete withdrawal of the Israeli soldiers temporarily or permanently, which is a very important issue as well. Hamas, as the source is saying, acknowledges that Israel will continue to target the leaders of Hamas and also the fighters of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. But on the other hand, we will see, according to the proposal, of course, that has not yet been agreed by Hamas, that they will release hostages gradually release all Israeli hostages, except for male soldiers. Female soldiers will be released as well. That's according to the latest proposal. But again, this proposal Hamas needs to agree to, and then the negotiations could start.
All right, just translate the person behind you calling for the release, or getting the hostages back home, calls we hear there at Hostage Square and on the streets of Tel Aviv. Balir Sladin, thank you for that. We're going to come back to the hostage issue a little later in the program. Meanwhile, for the second time this week, an Israeli community was hit with cross-border fire. But this was not in the Gaza envelope or in the north, but Bat Hefer in central Israel, which sits on the so-called green line demarcating the West Bank. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseron has that story.
For the second time today, Palestinian gunmen opened fire at Israeli communities surrounding the West Bank. This video was filmed in Ganer, located less than a mile from the Palestinian village of Jalameh. It came hours after Hamas-affiliated terrorists from the Tulkarem area fired shots at the nearby Israeli community of Bat Hefer. In a video posted on Hamas's non-official accounts, 3 gunmen are seen arriving at the border fence and opening fire. There were no injuries in either of the shootings, as the IDF says it is working to locate the shooters. As for the local residents, they've become used to such incidents.
זה לא משהו חריג, בסדר? אנחנו חווים את זה, בת חפר תמיד ידע יריות ותמיד ידע אירועים בצד השני. מה-7 באוקטובר היריות הפכו קצת יותר, מה שנקרא בעצימות יותר גבוהה, והיותר מטריד, או מה שנקרא, מה שהקהילה כרגע מתעסקת, זה הקרבה של החבר'ה האלה לגדר שלנו.
Wednesday's shootings come just 2 days after 19 unarmed Palestinians were caught after illegally crossing from the West Bank into Israel near Bat Hefer. A total of 30 people are believed to have climbed over the security barrier. Following the rising pace of incidents, local leaders and politicians have urged Defense Minister Yoav Gallant to hold an emergency meeting on the matter. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who is also a minister in the Defense Ministry, compared the situation along the Green Line to the pre-war status of the Gaza border area. Terror needs to be uprooted anywhere, even if it means Tulkarem will look like Gaza looks today, he said. The shootings come as the IDF continues its daily operations across the West Bank to uproot local terror cells. And despite the IDF eliminating Hamas commanders operating the West Bank, incidents like these are expected to continue.
Eitan, is that a valid comparison that we heard from Smotrich, comparing those towns on the Green Line to those communities that are on the Gaza border?
I don't need Smotrich analyzation. He has to fulfill his job towards other parts of the IDF. I would say it's very dangerous what's going there. The factor that IDF is controlling both sides of the wall and the fence should be much more active. IDF controlling every night in Tulkarem, in that area especially, and it should increase its activity. What I would like also to make it clear that the responsibility of the IDF, in my opinion, within a few days will put the hands of this kind of some of those people who are making these films, etc. But one thing is very clear. The worries of the civilians are all the right to be worried, and they should get from the IDF immediately the reaction. We are there, we are controlling there, we have intelligence, and we have to solve it as soon as possible, not let them to expand this kind of situation.
All right, yes.
Just to add one thing, Smotrich and his party said that October 7th happened mainly because of two things. One, the disengagement from Gaza. Second of all, there were no Jewish settlements in Gaza. Here, this is the huge challenge they have. IDF is in the West Bank, in Tulkarem, and there's a lot of Jewish settlements there. So if that's not happening, it's not helping in the West Bank, what's going to happen in Judea and Samaria, what's going to happen in Gaza?
All right, all good questions, and we'll just have to see how that develops. Last thing Israel needs is another front as active.
There is a front there. There is a front there. There's
but I'm
every
talking about
night.
as active as we see in
It's
Gaza.
much more sensitive because of 5 million people who are living in the central part of this country.
Gentlemen, I want you to stay with us. Ariel Osran, thank you for being with us. We will be right back, though, in just a few minutes, so stay with I-24 News.
The I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds.
De la frontière qui sépare Israël,
a state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels, now on Hot.
Welcome back to this special broadcast on I-24 News, Israel at War. We do have some breaking news reports out of Syria, according to Syrian media, saying that Syrian air defense systems have intercepted some aerial vehicles or aerial weapons near the city of Homs. Of course, Israel has been reportedly conducting strikes in Syria, not usually, though, in the area of Homs. Now, moving on, recent months have seen a growing mound of evidence. This includes victim testimonies, perpetrator confessions, forensic documentation of the violence, sexual and otherwise, that was being perpetrated by Hamas and other terror groups, specifically against women on and after the October 7th attack. Lagging behind, though, is international awareness and outrage at these atrocities, and also plans of action to address them, legal and otherwise. Now, a new group called the Global Women's Coalition Against Gender-Based Violence as a Weapon of War is being organized to tackle this issue. And with us, an organizer of this effort, Yesh Atid member of the Israeli Parliament, Shelley Talmaron. Shelley, thank you for joining us. Tell us about this, because such a crucial issue that is coming to the fore now. But again, the question is, where's the outrage? Where's the response?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I've been dealing with this issue for months now. We knew right from the beginning that we had horrible atrocities on October 7th, but we realized very fast that we had victims of sexual assault both on October 7th and unfortunately right now in Gaza. We've seen a lot of testimonies from hostages that were released, and also some of the terrorists that were interrogated and spoke about the sexual violence and the rape. They had instructions to do so. And so I've been speaking about this subject. I established the caucus for women who went through sexual assault during this war. These are war crimes. Yes, these are crimes against humanity. And I've been speaking around the world about this issue because I wanted to bring awareness to this. You know, the world is speaking about Gaza, but they're not speaking about our hostages, and they're not speaking about the sexual assault. And we've seen the recent video, which is absolutely devastating to see these young girls, 18-year-olds, and to listen to the terrorists in the video. So we understand what's going on there. And you know, today I was in the Knesset. I came from the Knesset, and I saw the parents of these young soldiers today at the Knesset. And they were saying maybe they are already grandparents. Maybe the girls have given birth. Maybe they're about to give birth. Which is a horrible, horrible thought, and one of the main reasons that we have to bring them back home immediately. So during my travels, I met with the Minister for Gender Equality in France, Aurore Berger, and I suggested to her to form an international coalition to recognize the sexual assault as war crimes, and to join forces between liberal Western countries who want to stand against this new method of terror. And this is a new method of terror. Let us not make any mistake. And this is not an Israeli problem, not only an Israeli problem. This is a problem that the rest of the world is facing as well. Of course, we have these kind of war crimes in other areas of the world, such as Ukraine, the Yazidis, and other places as well. But I think that other terror organizations are taking inspiration from what they saw on October 7th, and this is right at the doorstep of different countries in Europe, in the US, and all over the world. So we had a convention last week. We had over 180 guests from abroad come to Israel to the convention at the Knesset. And it was absolutely amazing to see the different countries around the world join forces together, and hopefully we'll have a lot of work to do together. We want to legislate in this regard in different countries, and maybe, you know, we have the Geneva Convention, but we need to, you know, maybe correct it because it's not up to date with these recent acts of terror. So there's a lot of work ahead of us, but it's good to know that we do have countries around the world who want to join and help us with this issue. And I do have to say, we were very disappointed from women's organizations around the world who were completely silent when we went through this and did not stand by Israel or the Israeli women. And therefore, we issued letters to all of them. We addressed all of them. And the UN, you know, UN Women, they issued a report in March. That's a first step. It's not enough, but it's a first step. And we intend to do a lot of work in that regard.
I mean, speaking of the amount of work you have to do, just for example, the attempts to sort of whitewash that comment, the statements that were made, that were heard on this tape about Hamas, about turning these women sexual slaves, and the attempt on social media to say, oh, that's a mistranslation of Arabic, and the attempt to even denial, never mind not even doing anything about the problem or the fact that it's ignored when all eyes, you have this like all eyes on Rafah, but even against the pushback of the people that are denying that it even happened.
Well, it's despicable that people are denying October 7th, since Hamas themselves were filming this and recording this and putting it out there for the world to see. So, you know, we believe our women, and we expect the world to believe our women. And, you know, I've seen this Eyes on Rafah, and I just want to say, so many eyes on Rafah. Maybe you can see our hostages there. Maybe someone can give us information about our hostages. So I suggest the world to open their eyes and look for our hostages in Rafah, besides looking at other things.
Right. Shelley, since you're here and you mentioned the hostages, we do, of course, there is a debate going on, and not only apparently when I say the government, between the government and the opposition, also within the government itself. Your party is the leading party of the opposition. I want to get your take on the current situation with the hostages and the debate that's going on. As I said, not even in the country, not even in the Knesset, but even apparently in the war cabinet over moving forward on some kind of hostage deal.
Well, in my opinion, there is no question. The top priority should be to bring the hostages back home. For me, that's the top priority, and there's no question about that. It's been over 230 days, and we have 125 hostages in Gaza, among them 17 women. These people deserve to come back home. These people were let down on October 7th by their country, their government, their army, unfortunately. And we need to bring them back home and bring safety back to our country, but also trust between the civilians and the country, the state. So for me, the top priority is bringing them back home. You know, saying they're running out of time, we've already said it so many times. But we've had enough funerals and enough coffins coming back to Israel. We need them to come back alive. We need to save the people who are still alive.
All right, Shelley Tamaron, thank you for joining us. We have Daniel Hagari now giving us his address. Let's go to that.
Can you hear him?
Technical problem with that. We will come to it. I want to go, Asaf, to some of the points we were just talking about. And you've said yourself, the government, this current government is not going to last the next 7 months. And the question is...
With the current parties.
With the current parties. I should mention, of course, Yesh Atid, your party leader, Yair Lapid, has called on Benny Gantz to step down. He's indicated that he may well, in the coming week even, as soon as...
June 8th.
Well, that's the kind of deadline. Do you expect that to happen? What would be the consequences of it? We saw the Yair Lapid with other leaders of the opposition meeting, releasing a photo today saying he's going to try to bring down the government. But let's remember that even without Benny Gantz's party, the coalition does have enough seats to remain in power.
I think nothing will happen after Gantz will leave the government, because it's too late. If he would have done it earlier, it would lead to election. But now, in this point of time, I think the government will last it. It's not going to be a big drama. It will make the life of the prime minister harder when he speaks to other leaders, because Gantz helped him in convincing the Americans on some of the operations or other issues. Now it's going to be more challenging, but other than that, the government will last the Gantz resign.
Well, let me ask you about that, Shay. What is we saw the picture just now. Is there a strategy for your party to or that opposition front to somehow bring new elections? When again, the coalition still has a solid 64 members to sustain it, at least certainly for the time being.
Well, first of all, I think there is no reason in the world for this mouth-to-mouth resuscitation that Mr. Gantz is giving this government. There was no reason for this warning of 3 weeks. He should have stepped down much, much earlier, and unfortunately he didn't. The first step should be for them to leave the government. Unfortunately, the date that he just said, that, June 8th, is leaving us a very short amount of time within the Knesset to make this government go away. But, election is not the only way to exchange a government. And I'm very happy about this meeting today because we fully intend to cooperate with our colleagues in order to create a better government. And I think that it's very, very good that they met, and they are our partners and other parties as well within the Knesset. And there are other options. And I'm not going to say what happened within the meeting, but it was very interesting.
Well, now you're teasing it. What are the other options? Because I'm not sure to what are the other? I mean, technically there are, but on a realistic stage, what are the other options outside of a new election?
Well, we've said months and months ago, we offered the Prime Minister to release the extremists within his government and to join forces and have a wider kind of government. And unfortunately, he did not do so. I think that's the best option even now. The best option is for him to finish as a prime minister, to have a new leadership within this Knesset and not go to election. But if we don't have another choice, then we will.
All right, Shelley Talmaron, again, thank you for joining us. We will bring you that Daniel Hagari, his briefing, when we can get it up. In the meantime, getting back to the hostages, one of them, 28-year-old Amit Bouskila, was murdered on October 7th during the Hamas terror rampage at the Nova Music Festival. Nearly 2 weeks ago, her body was recovered from a tunnel in Jabalia. Up until then, her family didn't know if she was being held hostage or had been murdered. Now, they are sharing their feelings in this interview adapted from Channel 12 News.
2 weeks have passed since the body of Amit Bouskila was recovered from Gaza and brought back to Israel. Weeks in which the family has been digesting the hardest news of all.
They took my princess, my baby, in the prime of her life. A 28-year-old girl.
On October 7th, Amit was at the Nova party with her friend. Shimon, she called you in her final moments. What did she say to you?
A terrorist ran after her and screamed in Arabic. She was shouting, "No, no, no." She was a righteous person. Her last words were a prayer. And then I heard 3 gunshots.
Soon after the call was cut off, the family was shown the footage of Amit in a car inside the Gaza Strip.
Amit was declared missing. After 3 weeks, she was declared a hostage. And after 4 weeks, a living hostage. After 3 months, they told us we made a mistake and we don't know what's happening with Amit.
After months of uncertainty, a knock on the door. The soldiers informed the family that Amit had been murdered and her body was recovered from Gaza.
There was a soldier who had a dream a few days before. Amit came to him in the dream and said, "I will give you the signs to find me. I will show you where I am, so that you come and rescue me, to bring the light back to my mother." They found a door that was entirely covered with sandbags. I thank God for bringing her back to me.
Thousands of Israelis attended the funeral, and unusually, the Prime Minister called to offer condolences.
I think they should all stand up and leave their seats and go home. The Knesset should be closed.
Amit was the whole world to Ilana and Shimon. Now, they try to hold on to her memory and always remember the faith and joy of life she had.
May her memory be a blessing. Now, the Reform Jewish Movement, the largest Jewish religious denomination in the United States, which represents over 1 million members, is holding its annual conference in New York this weekend, focusing on how it responds to the challenges posed by October 7th and its aftermath. Our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, is there. Mike, it's interesting because the Reform Movement, we know it's many, I'd even say a large majority of people who hold liberal views on issues relating to Israel, and in particular responding to October 7th and dealing with the issues of anti-Semitism in the U.S. This is a particular challenge, I would say, to the Reform Movement.
No doubt whatsoever. This is the second annual Recharging Reform Judaism Conference, but in a post-October 7th world, it seems like whatever was discussed a year ago is no longer relevant. One of the key focal points of this conference, which has so far been attended by 300 Reform Jewish clergy members, leaders, influencers, and the like, one of the key points is this rift, especially when it comes to Israel within Reform Judaism, which has burst wide out into the open. We talked to Rabbi Amiel Hirsch, the leader of the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue, who's organizing this event for the second straight year, about whether those young anti-Zionists are a lost cause at this point. Let's give a listen to Rabbi Hirsch.
While for some of the really hard anti-Zionist Gen Zs, I think we have lost them, at least for the foreseeable future. I don't know if 20 years from now, when they have families, whether they'll rethink their positions. But it's not too late. It definitely is not too late for the younger generations. And we have to instill in them the basic Jewish value, which is all Jews are responsible one for the other.
And of course, Kalev, American college campuses have kind of been the ground zero for this rift in young American Jewry. We spoke to a Columbia University student who was on one of the panels today to get her view up close and personal about whether she has witnessed that drift herself and how it's kind of impacted her. Let's give a listen to one of the speakers here today.
I think in the wake of October 7th, what I've seen is a resurgence in connection to Judaism and in, like I said, Jewish pride. I have never been so proud to be a Jew. I have never felt so connected to my Jewish identity. And it is unfortunate that it took such a horrific tragedy for a lot of us to kind of wake up and reconnect with our Judaism in ways that we had maybe lost touch with, or that we weren't raised as like you said, young Jews, to be connected to our religion and to our ancestral homeland. But I have so much faith and hope in the Jewish future, and I see strong, resilient Jewish students on my campus, on campuses across the country, and in my brothers and sisters bravely serving in the IDF in Israel. And I just have so much hope in the Jewish future because of the next generation of Jews and Jewish leaders.
Kalev, we've seen this time and time again. October 7th not only created fear, but it had the impact of drawing people who may have drifted away from Judaism closer once again. We asked Rabbi Melissa Simon, who heads up Israel education for Hillel International, an on-campus organization, how do you take those people who have essentially returned to Judaism, returned to their roots, returned to their love, returned to their heritage, and get them this time around to stay into the fold for good? Here's Rabbi Simon.
I think that in terms of wanting to make sure that the Jewish community members feel connected in the long term is helping people build real relationships. So it's not transactional, but it's really based on getting to know people, getting to know what's important to them, getting to know what their passions are, and having the Jewish community that they are part of really reflect their needs and their values. And I think that as we look ahead towards the coming high holidays, I think a lot of people are looking for strong messages about Jewish hope, Jewish resiliency, and our place in the larger world.
Kalev, one of the other big topics for discussion is the interfaith and social justice partnerships that the Reform movement had built over time. So much disappointment that their partners and allies, or what they thought were their allies, really didn't come through post-October 7th. Whether those relationships can be salvaged, whether it's even worth trying to salvage those relationships at this point, also a topic of discussion here at the Recharging Reform Judaism Conference, which will continue into tomorrow here in Manhattan.
Mike, I'll just note that what happened on October 7th and its aftermath may indeed, for example, impact in the U.S. and increase that sort of inner core of people that strongly identify as Jewish or support Israel. But it's really the much larger outer core of people that it, unfortunately, and we heard it from Rabbi Hirsch, may alienate them, not just from Israel, but even from their Jewish identity. We'll just have to see how this plays out in the years to come. Decades even. Mike Wagenheim there in New York City, thank you for that. And Asaf, you were the Consul General in New York City. You had a deal with the American Jewish community. I just want to get your response to that report. Like I said, the words from Rabbi Hirsch about a lost generation. And I've even broadened it beyond Reform Judaism. I was in the U.S. recently, and a gentleman, a Jewish gentleman, who almost just an acquaintance or just someone in passing, said to me, what's going to become of us? He was asking me, the person living in Israel, what's going to become of us American Jews?
Well, I got to say that in the last 25 years, the older you are, the more supporter of Israel you are. So when people talked about the lost generation of 20 years ago, and these people are supporters of Israel, I want to say something about the reform movement. They were, during the years, more criticizing Israel than
as I mentioned,
other organization. But Rabbi Hirsch is a very influential leader, and we saw some very strong speeches from him since October 7th. First of all, because of what happened in Gaza, but what happened in New York as well. I'm not sure, going back to how we started this program, I don't know what's going to happen to the reform movement if this war will last another 7 months. Because as of now, they are very supportive of Israel. I don't know what's going to happen. We're going to have election during this time in the States. It's very challenging for them as well.
Very challenging. And again, that brings us back to the question of, if we're looking at a long war, really, it may not even be what happens during the war, but what happens in the days after it. That may be the deciding factor, both on Israel's diplomatic front, but its relations even with, for example, the diaspora Jewish communities abroad.
Yes, you're right. I think that I called it another arena that Israel, as the state of the Jews, has to be more active and see, because I think that what we realized in the last weeks, that reduced dramatically in the last months, reduced dramatically on the situation of the self-confidence of the Jews in the United States, in Europe, in the places where was like a very strong roots by feeling equal to everybody. And I think that the situation is coming worse. By the way, in the United States, I have to myself my science. I briefed in Columbia University at 2017, and I was guarded by 3 policemen, and I was trying to find out what's going here, and I realized about the activity of these extremist Muslims that entered to the university, and I think it was written on the wall, as we say, what's going the direction. I think that in this situation, the Jewish communities all over the United States has to unite themselves in order to create one goal, to bring themselves back the self-confidence and try to bring the next also presidential, after the elections, to bring the next president to make activities that support their living. And I think Israel also should be involved in these circumstances.
One other thing, sometimes I hear, and I think Columbia University is the next destination of the IDF. It's not. It's always been a problem to Israel what's happening in Colombia since Edward Said for 25 years. But the Israeli government has no strategy on these issues. Nothing. We are not planning how to deal with this issue.
Not even there.
It's a huge problem, not only in Colombia.
We're going to have to leave it at that, though. Asaf Sharif, Eitan Dango, thank you for joining us. Now, as we've been talking about, anti-Semitism has been brewing around the world since October 7th. But one surprising group of individuals is speaking out, showing support for the Jewish state, as they themselves have a dark family history rooted in anti-Semitism. Our correspondent Nicole Sedek joined descendants of Nazi perpetrators in a solidarity march here in Israel. Let's take a look at that.
A large display of solidarity seen in the streets of Ashkelon in southern Israel. But take a closer look, and you may be surprised by who's actually waving these blue and white flags.
Basically, my whole family was involved in the Second World War. They were Nazis. They were known as a Nazi family in town.
Hundreds of Germans with their own family history of anti-Semitism.
It's very important for me to be here to say my family story because I'm a descendant of Nazi perpetrators. My family was actively involved in the Holocaust. My grandparents, also my grandmothers. And as I found out, I was very shocked, and I want to speak about because my grandparents, they didn't speak about it.
They're all in the Jewish state participating in March of the Nations, a solidarity mission that brings together Holocaust survivors with descendants of the Nazi regime.
I can't change the past, but it's my responsibility to affect the future and the present times.
And their mission is working.
Not only they are not blamed in what their grandfathers done, but also they take responsibility for those deeds. So I don't see anything more high, more pure, and more human than those people.
Aryeh Itamar was born in the Soviet Union, a survivor of the Nazi regime.
My grandmother managed to escape with me from the Odessa, which was surrounded by the Nazi armies. And it was the last train which managed to break through the German and the Romanian forces.
He came to Israel in 1947 when he was just 9 years old, making the long journey on the SS Exodus. But despite this painful past, he has no hate here in the present.
I cannot look on young people that they have to carry the blame of their grandfathers. I do not accept this idea at all.
In the shadow of the October 7th massacre and the anti-Semitic rallies that have since popped up throughout Europe, the mission of March of the Nations and March of Life are even more crucial this year.
March of Life this year, we were in front of the university in Leipzig, and there were a Palestine demonstration inside, but we have a bigger group and it was a very good statement and a very important statement, and we will not be silent in this time.
For me, it was pretty clear that I cannot stay silent. I can't remain silent, especially in a situation like today, after the 7th of October. It's so important to speak up and to stand with Israel and to stand with the Jewish people and to support them.
Hundreds of Germans with no Jewish ties showing support for the Jewish state in its time of